I never thought a 6-inch snowfall would turn me into a neighborhood pariah. But here I was, staring at a $200 fine taped to my front door for snow falling off my car onto the street. My name is Frank Fitzgerald, and I have lived in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in Aurora, Colorado for 3 years now. The HOA was always a pain, but this crossed every line imaginable. I ripped the notice off my door and read it again, my breath forming clouds in the frigid January air. According to the violation notice, I had committed the grievous offense of allowing snow from my wheel wells to fall onto the community streets, creating what they called an environmental hazard and aesthetic violation. I stood there in my driveway, completely dumbfounded. It was 7 in the morning, and I had just gotten home from my night shift at the hospital where I worked as an emergency room nurse. The snow had started falling around midnight, and by the time I left work at 6, the roads were covered. Of course, my wheel wells had packed snow in them. Every single car on the road did. The fine was signed by Karen Morrison, the HOA president, a woman whose entire existence seemed dedicated to making everyone else miserable. I had dealt with her before over my mailbox being a 1/4 inch too far from the curb, and another time because my trash cans were visible from the street for approximately 15 minutes longer than the allowed time frame on collection day. I went inside, threw the notice on my kitchen counter and tried to get some sleep, but I could not stop thinking about it. $200 for snow falling off my car. Snow. Frozen water that would melt within hours. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of the street. There were tire tracks everywhere, little piles of snow and slush from dozens of cars. Why was I being singled out? After a few hours of restless sleep, I got up and called the HOA office. A cheerful receptionist named Deanne answered. I explained my situation, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "Oh yes, Mr. Fitzgerald," she said, her tone shifting from cheerful to cautious. "Mrs. Morrison did mention she would be issuing that violation. You see, Section 12.4 of the HOA bylaws states that residents are responsible for any debris, including snow and ice, that falls from their vehicles onto community property. Deanne, it snowed last night. There is snow everywhere. How am I supposed to prevent snow from accumulating in my wheel wells while I am at work? The bylaw suggests residents should clean their vehicles before entering the community," she said, and I could hear her reading directly from something. Failure to maintain vehicle cleanliness standards can result in fines up to $500 per occurrence. "This is insane," I said. "It is literally impossible to drive through a snowstorm without getting snow on your car." "I understand your frustration, Mr. Fitzgerald. You are welcome to appeal the fine at the next HOA board meeting. That will be in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Meanwhile, I was supposed to just pay $200 for snow existing. I hung up and started researching the bylaws she mentioned. Sure enough, buried in the 100-page document was Section 12.4. It had been added just 6 months ago during a bylaw revision that nobody attended, because the meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday when most people were at work. I decided to fight this. I was not paying $200 for snow. The next snowfall came 3 days later. I was ready. Before my shift ended, I checked the weather obsessively. Light snow was expected to start around 5 in the morning. I got off at 6. This time, I brought towels and a portable brush. Before I left the hospital parking lot, I spent 15 minutes cleaning every inch of my car. I brushed off the roof, the hood, the trunk, and yes, I got down on the ground and cleaned out my wheel wells as best I could. The drive home took 40 minutes. By the time I reached the entrance to Meadowbrook Heights, my car had accumulated more snow. Of course it had. That is what happens when you drive through falling snow. But I was not entering the community until my car was spotless. I pulled over onto the shoulder just outside the subdivision entrance and started cleaning again. It was freezing. My fingers went numb within minutes. Other cars drove past me, their drivers giving me confused looks. I did not care. I was not giving Karen Morrison any ammunition. 20 minutes later, my car was as clean as I could get it. I drove into the subdivision slowly, paranoid that snow would somehow materialize on my vehicle through sheer spite. I made it to my driveway and rushed inside, feeling victorious but also realizing how absolutely ridiculous this situation had become. The next morning, there was another notice on my door. This time, the fine was for $300. The violation: loitering outside the community entrance in a manner that created a traffic hazard and reflected poorly on the neighborhood aesthetic. I actually laughed. It was either laugh or scream. Karen had apparently driven past me while I was cleaning my car and decided that was also a violation. The notice included a grainy photograph taken from her phone showing my car on the shoulder with me bent down cleaning the wheel wells. This meant war. I took the day to compile evidence. I photographed every car in the neighborhood, documenting snow, dirt, and road salt on their wheel wells and undercarriages. I found 17 vehicles with the same or worse conditions than mine had been on the day of my first fine. I photographed the streets, showing that snow and slush were everywhere. I even pulled up weather reports showing the temperature and snowfall data. Then I did something I should have done from the beginning. I called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Henderson, and she specialized in HOA disputes. When I explained my situation, she actually laughed, which made me feel slightly better. "Frank, this is one of the more absurd cases I have heard, and I have heard some doozies," she said. "The problem is that HOAs have a lot of power in Colorado, and technically, if that bylaw exists and was properly voted on, they can enforce it. However, the enforcement has to be consistent. If they are only fining you and not everyone else, that is selective enforcement, which is illegal." "I have pictures of at least 17 other cars with snow on them," I said. "Perfect. That is exactly what we need. Here is what you are going to do. Send them a formal appeal letter. I will draft it for you. Cite selective enforcement and include your evidence. Demand that they rescind both fines and remove the violations from your record. If they refuse, we will take this to a hearing and potentially to court if necessary." "How much is this going to cost me?" I asked, suddenly worried. "My consultation is free." "If we go to a hearing, I charge $200 an hour, but honestly, I think once they see you are serious and have documentation, they will back down. Most HOAs do not want the publicity or legal expense." Patricia drafted a letter that was professional, detailed, and slightly intimidating. It referenced Colorado HOA laws, cited specific cases of selective enforcement, and included a thumb drive with all my evidence. I sent it via certified mail to ensure Karen could not claim she never received it. The response came faster than I expected. 3 days later, I received a phone call from Deanne at the HOA office. She sounded nervous. "Mr. Fitzgerald, Mrs. Morrison would like to meet with you to discuss your appeal. Would you be available tomorrow at 10 in the morning at the community center? Will this meeting be recorded?" I asked. Patricia had advised me to document everything. I suppose it could be," Deanne said. "Is that necessary?" "Yes, I want everything on the record." There was a pause. "I will let Mrs. Morrison know." The next morning, I arrived at the community center with my phone ready to record and a folder full of printed evidence. Patricia had offered to come with me, but I wanted to try handling this myself first. I could always escalate if needed. Karen Morrison was already there, sitting at a table with two other board members I recognized, Tom Whitley and Sandra Green. They all had tight, disapproving expressions that seemed to be the standard look for HOA board members. "Mr. Fitzgerald," Karen said, not standing or offering to shake hands, "please sit down." I sat, placed my phone on the table with the recording app clearly visible, and opened my folder. Karen glanced at the phone with obvious displeasure. "Is that really necessary?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. She pursed her lips. "Very well. We received your appeal letter and your evidence. The board has reviewed your case." "And," I prompted when she did not continue. Tom cleared his throat. "The board stands by the initial violation. The bylaw is clear, Mr. Fitzgerald. Residents are responsible for debris from their vehicles. The fact that other residents may also be in violation does not excuse your behavior." "So you acknowledge that other residents are violating the same bylaw?" I asked. Sandra shifted uncomfortably. "We issue violations as we observe them. We cannot be everywhere at once." "But you happen to be watching my house during both snowfalls," I asked. "That seems like targeted harassment." Karen's face flushed. "That is a serious accusation, Mr. Fitzgerald. I was simply driving through the neighborhood during my normal routine. At 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. And then again when I was cleaning my car outside the subdivision entrance. I am an early riser," she said defensively. "And I happened to be coming home from my sister's house when I saw you loitering. I was cleaning my car to avoid the exact violation you fined me for the first time," I said. "This is a catch-22. If I drive home with snow on my car, I get fined. If I stop to clean my car, I get fined for loitering. How exactly am I supposed to comply with these bylaws?" The three board members exchanged glances. Tom spoke again. "Perhaps you could clean your car at work before you leave." "I do. The snow accumulates during the drive home because it is actively snowing. That is how snow works." Sandra actually seemed to suppress a smile at that, but Karen was not amused. "Your tone is not helpful, Mr. Fitzgerald," she said. "The board has made its decision. The fines stand. If you wish to escalate this further, you can request a formal hearing with the entire board, but that will not occur until next month's meeting." "Fine," I said. "Schedule the hearing. And be prepared to explain to all the homeowners why you are selectively enforcing this bylaw." I left the meeting frustrated but not defeated. I called Patricia and updated her. She was not surprised. "They are hoping you will just give up and pay the fines," she said. "Most people do, but we are not going to let them get away with this. I am going to file a formal complaint with the Colorado HOA office and prepare for the hearing. In the meantime, document everything. Every interaction, every violation you see from other homeowners, everything." For the next 3 weeks, I became a one-man HOA surveillance operation. I photographed cars, documented street conditions, and even started a spreadsheet tracking snowfall dates and times. I also joined the Meadowbrook Heights community Facebook group and posted about my situation. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of homeowners came forward with their own stories of ridiculous fines and selective enforcement. One couple had been fined because their garage door was open for more than 30 minutes on a Saturday while they were cleaning it. Another resident was fined for having a bird feeder that attracted too many birds. Someone else was cited for parking their car on the street overnight when they had company visiting, even though there was no overnight parking ban in the actual bylaws. Karen Morrison was making enemies left and right, but she had been president for 5 years, and most people were too intimidated or too busy to fight back. I was apparently the first person to seriously challenge her with legal representation. The Facebook post went viral within the community. Someone even started a petition to recall Karen from the board. Within a week, it had over 100 signatures from the 300 homes in the subdivision. Then things got weird. I came home from work one morning to find my trash cans knocked over, garbage strewn across my driveway. At first I thought it was raccoons, but my neighbor, an elderly man named George, knocked on my door later that day. "Frank, I saw someone messing with your trash cans last night around 2 in the morning," he said, looking uncomfortable. I did not get a good look, but it was a woman. She was driving a white SUV. Karen Morrison drove a white SUV. I thanked George and asked if he would be willing to make a statement if needed. He agreed, but asked me not to involve him unless absolutely necessary because he did not want problems with the HOA. I installed a security camera that night. 2 days later, it caught someone walking up to my mailbox and leaving another violation notice. The timestamp showed 2:30 in the morning. The person was wearing a dark coat with the hood up, but the body shape and gait looked like Karen. The violation was for having my porch light on after midnight, which apparently violated the light pollution section of the bylaws. I was not even home. I had been at work. The porch light was on a timer for security purposes, something that was explicitly allowed in the HOA documents. I forwarded the security footage to Patricia. She was furious. "This is harassment, Frank, clear and simple. She is escalating because you are not backing down. We need to consider getting a restraining order." "Is that even possible against an HOA president?" I asked. "Against her as an individual, yes. Let me draft something." Before Patricia could file anything, the situation exploded in a way I never expected. I went to work my night shift as usual, but around 3 in the morning, I got a call from the Aurora Police Department. My home security system had triggered an alarm, and they were dispatching officers to my address. I told them I was at work and gave them permission to check the property. When I got home at 7 in the morning, there were 2 police cars still in my driveway. My front door was slightly ajar and my stomach dropped. An officer met me before I could go inside. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I am Officer Martinez. We need to talk to you about what happened here." "What happened?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Someone attempted to break into your home around 3:15 this morning. Your alarm scared them off, but they did significant damage to your door frame. Do you have any idea who might want to do this?" I immediately thought of Karen, but I did not want to make accusations without proof. "I have been having issues with my HOA president. I installed security cameras recently. Let me check the footage." Officer Martinez followed me inside. My living room was untouched, but my front door lock was damaged and there were pry marks on the frame. Whoever tried to break in had not succeeded in getting past the deadbolt. I pulled up my security footage on my laptop. The angle was not perfect, but it showed a figure approaching my door around 3:10 in the morning. They were wearing dark clothing and a ski mask, making identification impossible. However, when they turned to leave after the alarm went off, the camera caught something interesting. A small white SUV parked on the street with the license plate partially visible. Officer Martinez leaned in closer. "Can you enhance that?" I zoomed in on the image. The license plate was blurry, but 3 letters were clear: KMM. I felt a chill run down my spine. "You know what vehicle this might be?" Martinez asked. "I think so," I said. "My HOA president, Karen Morrison, drives a white SUV. I do not know her exact license plate, but those initials match her name." Martinez took notes. "We will need to follow up on this. Do you have any other documentation of issues with this person?" I showed him everything. The violation notices, the Facebook posts, George's statement about my trash cans, the footage of someone leaving the midnight violation notice. Martinez's expression grew more serious with each piece of evidence. "Mr. Fitzgerald, this looks like a clear pattern of harassment escalating to attempted breaking and entering. I am going to need you to come down to the station and file a formal report. We will also need to speak with this HOA president." The investigation moved quickly after that. Officer Martinez and his partner went to Karen Morrison's house that afternoon. I was not there, but Patricia called me later with an update. Karen had initially denied everything, but when confronted with the security footage and the license plate match, she broke down and admitted to leaving the violation notices at odd hours. She claimed she was just doing her job as HOA president. However, she vehemently denied attempting to break into my house. The police impounded her SUV and found something interesting: fresh damage to the front bumper consistent with hitting a curb or pole, and mud on the tires that matched soil samples from the street in front of my house. They also found a pry bar in her trunk. When confronted with this evidence, Karen claimed she had been home all night and that someone must have stolen her car. But her story fell apart when her own home security system showed her leaving her house at 2:50 in the morning and returning at 3:30. She was arrested for attempted burglary and criminal harassment. The story hit the local news that evening. HOA president arrested for attempting to break into homeowner's house after dispute over snow. It was surreal seeing my subdivision on the news. The next HOA board meeting was packed. Over 200 homeowners showed up, which was unprecedented. Tom Whitley and Sandra Green tried to maintain order, but people were angry. Not just about my situation, but about years of petty fines, arbitrary enforcement, and Karen's reign of terror. The board voted unanimously to rescind all violations against me and refund any fines I had paid, which I had not. They also voted to remove Karen Morrison from the board and strip her of any HOA authority. Additionally, they agreed to review and revise the bylaws, particularly Section 12.4 about vehicle debris. Patricia attended the meeting with me. During the public comment period, she stood up and addressed the board. "I want to make something clear to this board and to all the homeowners here. What happened to Frank Fitzgerald is illegal. HOAs have power, but they do not have unlimited power. They cannot harass residents, they cannot selectively enforce bylaws, and they certainly cannot commit criminal acts in the name of enforcement. If any of you have experienced similar harassment or unjust fines, I encourage you to document everything and seek legal counsel. You have rights." The room erupted in applause. After the meeting, at least a dozen homeowners approached me to share their own horror stories. We formed a homeowner advocacy group dedicated to keeping the HOA accountable and ensuring the bylaws were reasonable and fairly enforced. Karen Morrison's legal troubles were just beginning. In addition to the criminal charges, I filed a civil lawsuit against her for harassment, property damage, and emotional distress. Patricia was confident we had a strong case. The HOA itself was not liable since Karen had acted outside her authority, but Karen personally was looking at serious consequences. The criminal trial took place 4 months later. I had to testify about the violations, the harassment, and the attempted break-in. Karen's lawyer tried to paint her as an overzealous volunteer who took her HOA duties too seriously, but the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage, the pattern of harassment, the physical evidence from her vehicle, and her own contradictory statements sealed her fate. She was found guilty of attempted burglary, criminal harassment, and criminal mischief. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my door and my legal fees. During the sentencing, the judge made a statement that stuck with me. HOAs serve an important function in maintaining communities, but they are not above the law. When someone in a position of authority abuses that power to harass and intimidate others, they must be held accountable. Miss Morrison, your actions went far beyond overzealous enforcement. You targeted Mr. Fitzgerald because he dared to stand up to you, and you escalated to criminal behavior. That is unacceptable. The civil suit settled out of court. Karen's homeowner's insurance ended up paying most of the settlement, which was $50,000. I used part of that money to install a proper security system and to take a long, overdue vacation. The rest went into savings. Life in Meadowbrook Heights changed significantly after Karen's arrest. The new HOA board, which included several members of the homeowner advocacy group, completely rewrote the bylaws. Section 12.4 was eliminated entirely. The new rules focused on actual community concerns like structural maintenance and safety, rather than petty aesthetic complaints. The board also implemented a fairness policy requiring that all violations be documented with photographic evidence, that residents be given reasonable time to correct issues before fines were imposed, and that enforcement be consistent across all properties. They created an online portal where residents could see all violations issued in the community, ensuring transparency. George, my elderly neighbor who had witnessed Karen messing with my trash cans, became an unlikely friend. He told me that Karen had been harassing him for years about his lawn, his mailbox, and once about his grandchildren's toys being visible in his yard. He had been too afraid to fight back, but seeing me stand up to her inspired him. "You know, Frank, I have lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, he said one afternoon while we were having coffee on my porch. I have seen 3 different HOA presidents, and Karen was by far the worst. She forgot that we are supposed to be a community, not enemies. What you did, fighting back like that, it reminded people that we do not have to just accept unreasonable treatment." "I just did not want to pay $200 for snow," I said, laughing. "It was never really about the snow, though, was it?" George said thoughtfully. "It was about power. Karen liked having power over people. That is why she kept escalating. She could not stand that you were not afraid of her." He was right. Looking back, the absurdity of the original violation was just a symptom of a much larger problem. Karen Morrison had turned the HOA into her personal fiefdom, and nobody had seriously challenged her until I was too tired and too annoyed to just pay the fine and move on. The story did not end there, though. About 6 months after Karen's sentencing, I was contacted by a reporter from a Colorado news magazine. They were doing a feature on HOA abuse and wanted to interview me. I agreed, hoping that sharing my story might help other people dealing with similar situations. The article, titled "When HOAs Go Too Far: One Homeowner's Fight Against Harassment," was published in August. It detailed my experience and included interviews with other Colorado residents who had faced ridiculous HOA violations. The article went viral, shared thousands of times on social media, and picked up by national news outlets. I started getting calls and emails from people across the country. Some wanted advice on fighting their own HOAs. Others just wanted to share their stories. One couple in Florida had been fined for having the wrong shade of beige paint on their house. A man in Texas was threatened with foreclosure because his grass was 1 inch taller than the allowed height. The stories were endless and often absurd. Patricia's law practice suddenly got very busy with HOA cases. She jokingly said, "I should get a referral fee, but honestly, I was just glad that people were finally standing up to unreasonable enforcement." The homeowner advocacy group I helped form grew to include almost half the subdivision. We started having monthly meetings to discuss community issues and ensure the HOA board was staying accountable. The meetings were nothing like the old ones under Karen's leadership. These were actually productive, with residents working together to maintain property values while respecting everyone's rights. We even organized community events like summer barbecues and holiday decorating contests. The subdivision started to feel like an actual neighborhood instead of a collection of houses governed by an iron fist. One unexpected consequence of the whole situation was that I became somewhat of a local celebrity in Aurora. People recognized me at the grocery store or at the hospital. Most were supportive, though a few thought I had overreacted. "It was just a fine," one person said to me at a community event. "Was it really worth all that trouble?" "It was never just a fine," I explained. "It was about the principle. If we let people in authority abuse their power without consequences, even over something small, it sets a precedent. Today it is a $200 fine for snow. Tomorrow it is for closing on someone's home because their mailbox is the wrong color. The point is, we have to hold people accountable." That person nodded thoughtfully but did not seem entirely convinced. I understood. Not everyone wants to fight. Some people just want to live their lives without conflict, and that is fine. But someone has to be willing to push back when things go too far. The final chapter of the Karen Morrison saga came about a year after her sentencing. She was released on parole after serving 14 months. Part of her parole conditions included staying away from Meadowbrook Heights and having no contact with me or any HOA members. I heard from Patricia that Karen had moved to a different part of Colorado and was working at a retail job. Her life had been completely upended by her actions, which was unfortunate but ultimately her own doing. I did not feel sorry for her exactly, but I did not take pleasure in her downfall either. The whole situation had been unnecessary. If she had just been reasonable from the beginning, none of this would have happened. The new HOA president was a retired teacher named Robert Chen, who actually cared about the community rather than just enforcing rules. Under his leadership, the subdivision thrived. Property values went up, not because of strict aesthetic enforcement, but because people actually wanted to live there. The community had a reputation now for being friendly and well-maintained without being oppressive. As for me, life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything that happened. I continued working my night shifts at the hospital, but now when I drove home through snow, I did not stress about my wheel wells. I did not clean my car obsessively or worry about violation notices. The security cameras stayed up, though. Once you have dealt with someone trying to break into your house, you do not really feel comfortable without some extra protection. But mostly, they just recorded squirrels and the occasional delivery driver. I started dating someone I met through the homeowner advocacy group. Her name was Lisa, and she had her own HOA horror story involving a dispute over her fence height. We bonded over our shared frustration with unreasonable bylaws and eventually started seeing each other outside of meetings. It was nice to have someone who understood the stress I had been through. The trash cans that Karen had knocked over were replaced with nicer ones that locked, preventing any future vandalism, animal or human. My front door was repaired and reinforced with a better lock system. The porch light that had earned me a violation notice still went on every night at dusk, and nobody said a word about it. George and I maintained our friendship. He introduced me to his wife, Martha, who made incredible homemade cookies and insisted on bringing them over every Sunday. They treated me like family, and I appreciated having good neighbors after all the drama. One particularly satisfying moment came during a neighborhood meeting about 18 months after the incident. The board was discussing snow removal policies for the upcoming winter, and Robert suggested that residents help each other out during heavy snowfalls rather than worrying about minor violations. "We are a community," he said. "Let us act like one. If your neighbor's car has snow on it, maybe offer to help them clean it instead of reporting them. If someone's trash cans blow over in a storm, help them pick it up. These are the things that make a neighborhood worth living in." Everyone agreed. It was such a stark contrast to Karen's approach that I almost could not believe this was the same HOA. The bylaws that had caused so much trouble were now barely recognizable. The new version was 20 pages instead of 100, focused on actual issues like structural safety, fire hazards, and maintaining common areas. There were no more rules about wheel well snow, porch light timing, or the exact acceptable shades of house paint. People had freedom to live their lives while still maintaining a nice community. I thought a lot about what that original violation notice had set in motion. A $200 fine for snow falling off my car had led to an arrest, a criminal trial, a lawsuit, HOA reform, and ultimately, a much better community. It seemed like such a small thing to spark such massive change, but that is often how it works. Sometimes the smallest injustices, when challenged, reveal much larger problems. Patricia and I stayed in touch even after everything was resolved. She continued taking HOA cases and developed a reputation as the lawyer to call when your HOA was being unreasonable. She won most of her cases, usually through settlements once the HOAs realized they could not justify their actions. "You started something, Frank," she told me during a lunch meeting about a year and a half after we first met. "Before your case, a lot of people just accepted that HOAs could do whatever they wanted. Now people know they have options. They know they can fight back." "I just did not want to pay for snow," I said, repeating what had become my standard response. She laughed. "Sure, but you turned that into something bigger. You should be proud of that." I was proud, actually. Not in an arrogant way, but in the sense that I had stood up for myself and ended up helping others in the process. The dozens of homeowners who had contacted me, the changes in my own subdivision, and the increased awareness about HOA abuse all stemmed from my refusal to just pay an unjust fine. The local news did a follow-up story 2 years after the initial incident. They interviewed me, Robert Chen, Patricia, and several other homeowners who had benefited from the changes in Meadowbrook Heights. The story highlighted how communities could successfully reform their HOAs when residents worked together. During the interview, the reporter asked me if I thought the whole ordeal had been worth it. "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. "Would I have preferred to avoid all the stress and harassment? Sure, but I do not regret standing up for myself. This community is better now because people were not afraid to demand change. Sometimes you have to fight for what is right, even when it seems easier to just give in." The interview aired on a Friday evening. By Saturday morning, my story had been shared hundreds of times on social media. I got messages from people as far away as Maine and California, thanking me for speaking out and sharing their own HOA nightmares. One message stuck with me. It was from a woman in Nevada who had been fighting her HOA for 3 years over a dispute about her vegetable garden. She said watching my interview gave her the courage to hire a lawyer and take her case to court. She ended up winning, and her HOA was forced to change their bylaws to allow gardens. "You inspired me to keep fighting when I wanted to give up," she wrote. "Thank you for showing that standing up to bullies works, even when those bullies have official titles." These messages reminded me why the whole ordeal had been important. It was not about me or Karen Morrison, or even Meadowbrook Heights specifically. It was about the principle that people in positions of authority, no matter how small, need to be held accountable. HOA boards, city councils, bosses, teachers, anyone with power over others has a responsibility to use that power fairly and reasonably. Karen Morrison forgot that. She thought her position as HOA president gave her the right to harass and intimidate residents. She was wrong, and she paid the price for that mistake. Life continued moving forward. My relationship with Lisa got serious, and we eventually moved in together, though we stayed in my house in Meadowbrook Heights. She sold her place and was glad to be done with her own HOA nightmare. We talked about maybe buying a house without an HOA someday, but honestly, with the reforms in place, living here was actually pleasant now. The advocacy group continued meeting monthly, though the meetings became more about community building than fighting the board. We organized charity drives, neighborhood watch programs, and social events. The group became something positive rather than just a defensive response to bad leadership. I even joined the HOA board eventually. Robert Chen convinced me that having someone with my experience would help keep things fair and balanced. I was hesitant at first, not wanting to become the thing I had fought against, but I realized that was exactly why I should join. Good people need to be involved in governance to prevent bad people from taking over. My first action as a board member was to propose a homeowner bill of rights that would be included with all HOA documents. It outlined what homeowners could expect from the board, how to appeal violations, and what constituted harassment. The board approved it unanimously, and it became a model for other HOAs in the area. The snow that had started everything continued falling every winter, just like it always had. But now, nobody worried about wheel wells or falling ice or any of the absurd concerns that Karen had invented. People cleaned their cars when convenient, helped their neighbors when needed, and lived their lives without fear of arbitrary fines. I kept the original violation notice framed in my home office. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that small injustices can lead to big changes if someone is willing to stand up. A reminder that authority without accountability is just tyranny in miniature. And a reminder that sometimes the most mundane disputes can reveal the deepest problems. George passed away about 3 years after everything happened. He was 87 and had lived a good life. At his funeral, his daughter thanked me for being a good neighbor and friend. She mentioned that her father had been proud of me for standing up to Karen, and that it had inspired him to be more assertive in his own life. "He spent too many years being afraid of making waves," she said. "Watching you fight back reminded him that it is okay to stand up for yourself." His last few years were happier because of that. I had not realized I had made such an impact on him. It was humbling and sad, but also affirming. The ripple effects of standing up for yourself extend further than you might think. Martha, George's wife, stayed in their house for another year before moving to a retirement community. Before she left, she gave me a box of George's woodworking tools. He had been a hobbyist carpenter, and she thought I might appreciate them. I set up a small workshop in my garage and took up woodworking as a hobby. It was therapeutic, working with my hands and creating something tangible. I made a new mailbox post for Martha before she moved, carved with decorative details that would have earned multiple violations under Karen's regime. The new HOA board loved it and actually asked if I could make more for residents who wanted them. It became a small side business, making custom mailbox posts and decorative items for neighbors. The money from the civil lawsuit settlement provided a financial cushion that allowed me to reduce my hours at the hospital slightly. I still worked as a nurse, but I cut back to 3 nights a week instead of 4. The extra time let me focus on woodworking, the advocacy group, and my relationship with Lisa. We got married 4 years after the initial incident in a small ceremony held at the Meadowbrook Heights Community Center. The same building where I had fought the HOA board became the site of one of the happiest days of my life. Robert Chen officiated, and over 100 neighbors attended. It felt like a real community celebration, something that would have been impossible under Karen's divisive leadership. Patricia was there too, joking that she was glad to attend a Meadowbrook Heights event that did not involve legal proceedings. She had become a good friend over the years, not just a lawyer. Her practice had grown significantly, and she had hired 2 associates to help handle all the HOA cases she was getting. During the reception, several people gave toasts. Robert spoke about how I had helped transform the community. Lisa talked about how my willingness to fight for what was right was one of the things she loved about me. Even Diane, the HOA receptionist who had taken my initial call about the violation, spoke about how the changes had made her job better because she no longer had to enforce ridiculous rules. The most surprising toast came from Tom Whitley, one of the original board members who had sided with Karen. He had stayed on the board after her arrest and had been part of the reform efforts. "I owe Frank an apology," he said, standing up with his glass raised. "When he first challenged that snow violation, I thought he was being difficult. I thought he should just pay the fine and move on. I was wrong. Karen had us all convinced that strict enforcement was necessary to maintain property values, but she was really just on a power trip. Frank showed us that community does not come from fear and fines. It comes from mutual respect and reasonable expectations. This neighborhood is better because he did not just pay that fine." The room erupted in applause. I felt Lisa squeeze my hand under the table. It was vindicating to hear Tom admit he had been wrong, but more than that, it showed that people could change and grow. The years continued passing. Karen Morrison, as far as I knew, never returned to Aurora. She completed her parole and moved on with her life somewhere else. I occasionally wondered if she had learned anything from the experience, or if she still believed she had been right. I would never know, and it did not really matter. What mattered was that Meadowbrook Heights thrived. The subdivision became known throughout Aurora as one of the best places to live, not because of strict rules, but because of genuine community spirit. Property values did increase, proving that you do not need authoritarian enforcement to maintain a nice neighborhood. The advocacy group expanded beyond just HOA issues and started tackling broader community concerns like traffic safety, local school funding, and environmental initiatives. We successfully lobbied the city to install better street lighting and crosswalks near the elementary school. We organized a community solar program that reduced energy costs for participating households. The group became a model for neighborhood activism in Aurora. I eventually wrote a book about my experience, titled Standing Up to the HOA, a story of snow, harassment, and community reform. Patricia helped me navigate the legal aspects of telling the story, making sure I could not be sued for anything I included. The book was published by a small press that specialized in consumer advocacy stories. It was not a bestseller or anything, but it sold steadily and got good reviews. I received emails from readers who had used the book as a guide for fighting their own HOA battles. Some even won their cases by citing examples and strategies from my story. That felt good, knowing that my experience could help others. The book also generated some criticism. A few HOA advocates argued that I was encouraging chaos and undermining the necessary authority of HOAs. One review called me an anarchist who wanted to destroy property values. I laughed at that one. Nothing about my story was anti-HOA. It was anti-abuse. There is a big difference. Reasonable HOAs serve important functions. They maintain common areas, organize community improvements, and handle disputes between neighbors. The problem arises when individuals abuse their authority, or when bylaws become more about control than actual community benefit. That was the distinction I tried to make clear in the book. Lisa and I eventually had a kid, a daughter we named Grace. By then, it had been almost 6 years since the original violation notice. Grace would grow up in a Meadowbrook Heights that was nothing like the one I had moved into. She would never know the fear of arbitrary fines or petty enforcement. She would grow up in a real community where neighbors looked out for each other. Taking Grace for walks around the neighborhood, I often thought about how different things were. Kids played in their yards without parents worrying about toys being visible from the street. People painted their houses reasonable colors they actually liked. Mailboxes were decorative and personal rather than uniform and sterile. The community had personality now. It had life. That was worth fighting for. One winter evening, almost exactly 7 years after that first violation notice, it started snowing heavily. I was home with Lisa and Grace, watching the snow fall and accumulate. My car was parked in the driveway, and I knew by morning it would be covered in snow, with packed snow in the wheel wells. I did not care at all. That was freedom. That was what the whole fight had been about. The freedom to live your life without unreasonable interference. The freedom to drive home from work in a snowstorm without worrying about harassment. The freedom to be human and imperfect without facing consequences from petty authoritarians. The next morning, I cleared the snow from my car at a leisurely pace, helped George's old neighbors clear their driveway, and drove to work without a care in the world. There was no violation notice waiting for me when I got home. There never would be again. That simple security, that basic reasonable treatment, had been worth every moment of stress, every dollar spent on lawyers, every hour spent documenting and fighting and refusing to back down. Because in the end, it was never really about the snow at all.